yeah, we've also been talking a bit about this week about where to make sure or validate the data, because when you think about everyone on the podcast, I'm talking about like the blueprint with the phases: connect, buffer, process, framework, and store, that you can read in my cookbook. So basically, when you think about, okay, you have an API here, where do you validate the data? Do you validate the data directly on the API? Do you validate the data here in the before you put it in the buffer? When you take it out of the buffer and process it, do you validate the data then if you store it? Where do you make sure that the data is okay, that the data makes sense? And I found this a really, really interesting question, because like it gives a lot of depth of like thinking about an operations part, where you need to validate the data. And it's like generally I think you have to think about this in terms of, okay, what do you need? If you need to make sure that the transaction is processed correctly, think about a credit card transaction, or someone buys something. You want to make sure in an API call that this transaction actually is valid, and it's not the actual JSON string. If you get a JSON string, is not malformed. So you would already, once you ingest the data, you would then make sure that you validate the data and send the result back to the client. Tell the client, okay, listen, this transaction not going through. This credit card number wrong. We have some problem with the transaction. Something is strange. That's what you would do in this case. Some other cases where you have think about and one of you asked about IoT, a small IoT pipeline with a Raspberry Pi. Think about people use Raspberry Pis for actually measuring the weather data out there, or have some weather stations that are sending data into your platform. So when you think about first where the data is going to go through is in the connect phase, for instance, to an API. Do you really validate the weather data? Tell the weather station this data doesn't make sense? Or do you go and just take the data, say, okay, I got it, and then filter it out in the back end, like filter it out in the processing behind it, so it will not get into the store, and the wrong data will be showed to the customer, or you have a failure there. That's something where you need to think about, okay, where is it possible, where it is necessary. If it's like, if you can drop the data and it's not really important, because you know that weather data is going to send me another data point in 10 minutes, like, who cares? So that's something actually to think about, and that actually I needed to think about when I got this question, like, what's a good question? What's a good answer here? Because it depends, like, what do you want to do? How important is the data that you're processing? Yeah, so that's something to think about.